Welcome to Shielded, the institutional report covering confidential on-chain finance powered by Zama. I'm Kyle O'Brien, VP of Investor and Protocol Relations at Zama, and we're thrilled to have you here today for our very first live stream. Q1 2026 was arguably the most consequential quarter in Zama's history. The protocol launched on mainnet, TGE was a massive success, staking went live, and numerous key partnerships have been announced. On today's show, we're going to cover all of this and more. Later, we'll speak with the leaders at OpenZeppelin, T-Rex, and GSR to learn how Zama is already powering confidential on-chain finance. But first, I want to give the floor to our founder and CEO, Rand Hindi, to share some of his top highlights from Q1. Rand, welcome to Shielded.
Hey, good to see everyone. Hey, Kyle.
Well, before I hand over the reins, I want to ask you something on the personal side. It's been a bit of a whirlwind start to 2026. How does it feel to have the first live functional FHE protocol in production?
Well, to be honest, it's very emotional in a way. I met my co-founder Pascal Payet back in 2015 when I first discovered FHE, Fully Homomorphic Encryption. And I remember at the time, him and I, were talking about all the amazing things that we could do if this technology ever worked. So fast forward a decade later, I guess, and it does work. And we did launch the first FHE system in production. And I would even say, actually, the first cryptographic privacy-preserving system in production that uses FHE as a core primitive. So yeah, very excited. Like, this is really a historical moment for cryptography for sure.
Yeah, it's an amazing achievement. Well, we've got plenty to share today. I'm going to hand the floor over to you. You can walk through some of the highlights from Q1.
Great. Amazing. So, hey, everyone. I'd like to give a very quick introduction about Zama and give you some updates on the protocol. So Zama is a confidentiality layer for on-chain finance. It enables token issuers to issue, trade, manage tokens confidentially on existing public blockchain while maintaining full compliance. So Zama is not a new L1 or L2, but rather a layer of encryption on top of existing L1s and L2s. I think a good way to think about Zama is a little bit what HTTPS did for the internet. It added a layer of encryption to e-commerce websites, to data exchanges. Zama is effectively HTTPS for public blockchains and financial transactions. So Q1 obviously was a huge quarter for us, first of all, because we did launch mainnet. So this was our first quarter with a live protocol, but also because it showed that there is a lot of excitement around privacy today. So Zama is the fastest privacy protocol to reach $100 million of total value shielded. It's a metric called TVS, total value shielded. So how many dollars were encrypted in the Zama protocol? It took us only 25 days from launching mainnet in December to reaching $100 million of TVS in January during our auction. To give you some comparison, it took Zcash 1,500 days to actually get to that number. So I think privacy in 2026 is growing fast, not just only because Zama is awesome, but also because people realize that we need it for a lot of very important use cases. Our auction also proved that FHE can scale. I really want to stress that. For a long time, the narrative against homomorphic encryption was it doesn't scale. It's too slow. You can't really do anything with it. Well, we run an auction, which was the #1 application on Ethereum mainnet for an entire day on January 24th. 15,000 encrypted bids were sent, and 30% of the block space at some point was encrypted. So Zama basically encrypted a third of Ethereum block space in January 24th. Despite that, we've only used 4% of the compute capability of the protocol on CPU. So let me say that again. We encrypted a third of Ethereum's block space on only 4% of a CPU infrastructure running FHE. So what this means is we could actually run all of Ethereum encrypted if we wanted to. It would still not even use a fraction of the compute capability of the protocol today. So try to imagine what will be possible moving to GPUs, moving to ASICs down the line. So FHE is not just scalable, it's actually faster than Ethereum mainnet today and most L2s that you would want to actually use this on. About the token, so the token is now listed on basically every major exchange, which is not something to take lightly, because for a privacy protocol to be listed on everything from Binance to Coinbase to Upbit to Bitpanda to DEXs took a lot of work and a lot of learnings in the process as well. So today you can actually purchase Zama tokens pretty much anywhere that you want to do that. And one of the consequences, we've had pretty tremendous trading volume on the token over the past quarter. Half of the supply circulating today is actually staked. So, about 1 billion worth of Zama tokens is currently staked in the protocol, which is more or less half of the circulating supply. So that's really important because it shows that people do participate into the long-term security of the protocol instead of, just holding the token passively. Because of the way that we do staking rewards, we're emitting 5% of FDV on year one. So 10% of the FDV being staked, the APY is roughly around 50%. So it's actually pretty good to be staking today. We're also rallying the entire ecosystem around a new token standard, ERC 7984 for confidential tokens, which we'll talk about in more details with OpenZeppelin a little bit later. This is really important. So a huge focus for us in 2026 is actually integrations with everything that people use in crypto. We want wallets to support confidential tokens, custody solutions to support confidential tokens, exchanges to support deposits, withdrawals of confidential tokens, stablecoin on and off ramp to fiat to support confidential minting and redemption of stablecoins. We want DeFi protocols to support confidential tokens for confidential DeFi. You get the idea. Any touch point that someone has in crypto, we are working on integrating confidentiality into it so that the experience from the user's perspective of using confidentiality doesn't change versus doing everything publicly. So 2026, huge focus, integrations. We've also made it very easy for developers to integrate confidential tokens, as easy as ERC20s at this point. So as I mentioned, we have this ERC 7984 standard, which makes it standard for people to integrate confidential tokens. So wallets don't have to think about 5 different privacy protocols. The standard works for any kind of privacy protocol, not just Zama. So we've really made it in a way that is open-ended. We've also created what's called the confidential token registry. So in the Zama protocol, there is a special smart contract in which we register the confidential tokens alongside the underlying ERC20 token that they can be shielded back into from. So for example, if you want to know which confidential USDT token you have to use for shielding your USDT ERC20s, you can just look up on chain the address of the confidential USDT token, and you don't have to worry about fragmentation. You don't have to worry about any of those things. To be listed in the token registry, confidential tokens also need to include compliance features. They need to be audited. So we're making sure that this registry is something that people can use without having to think whether this is a scam or whether it's the correct token. You can just use what's in it. And finally, we've created a financial SDK. So for developers who are building financial applications specifically, we're now making it extremely easy to integrate confidential tokens into their confidential swap protocol, into their confidential wallets, confidential payment apps, so that they don't have to go into the low-level details of the Zama protocol. We are going multi-chain this year as well. So we've launched on Ethereum mainnet already. We are launching on other EVM chains in the next second half of the year, and then finally ending the year with Solana. And in the process, we are also going to be moving to GPU for running the FHE computation. So as I said earlier, on CPU, we can already go faster than ETH mainnet. But of course, if you want to support Solana, you're going to need a little bit more capacity than that. And that's where GPUs come in. We are confident that we can launch on GPU with 100 plus TPS per chain that we deploy on. And that very quickly in 2027 will be above 1,000 TPS of encrypted transactions. So FHE at this point pretty much is just a compute problem. The more compute you throw at it, the faster it gets, the more transactions you can actually process, the bigger the addressable market for this technology and for the Zama protocol. It's just Moore's law. There's really nothing more to it. A note on quantum resistance. So there's been a lot of talks recently about blockchain not being quantum resistant. Well, fortunately, FHE already is quantum resistant. It uses something under the hood called lattice cryptography, which has been recognized by NIST as one of the strongest post-quantum options available. So a different way to say it is, if you can break the cryptography that underpins FHE, it basically means we don't really have anything post-quantum ready, which means no private communications, no credit cards, like nothing, which arguably would be a huge problem, not just for blockchain, but for the entire world. So it also means that the data you're encrypting with Zama and putting on public blockchains today is safe, even against future quantum computers. So you don't have to worry about any kind of forward secrecy in this particular instance. Now let's talk a little bit about use cases and partnership. So we also spend quite a bit of time trying to understand where does FHE and Zama play a role. And you've noticed earlier that I talked a lot about a confidentiality protocol for on-chain finance. I didn't talk about a general purpose privacy protocol for anything you might want to do. Even though technically you could, we found that where we bring the most value is for financial transactions on public blockchains. So for example, RWAs, massive market. I don't think people understand how big RWAs are compared to other assets that we have on chain. RWAs is basically anything that you can trade and has value in the world that you can potentially tokenize. So the low end market size that people are expecting for RWAs in 2030, in 4 years, is $4 trillion. And TRX, one of our partners that we're working with on bringing confidential RWAs on chain, is one of the leaders in the space. The tokening team that became the TRX protocol actually is behind one of the most successful RWA standards. And they already have over $100 billion of committed TVL for the protocol when it launches. So I think RWAs is going to be a massive use case for us and something we're going to be focusing on a lot with our partner TRX. We've also worked with market makers quite extensively on trying to understand how we can help them settle on-chain confidentially. As you all know, front running is a big issue in blockchain. We like to think that this is normal, but it's not normal. It's actually illegal in most financial markets. For some reason, it's not illegal yet in blockchain. But obviously, people don't want their trades to be broadcasted publicly to the world, and we enable exactly that. As a market maker, as an OTC desk, you can settle your large OTC trades on-chain atomically and confidentially. You can not just hide the amount, you can also hide the direction of the trades that you're making. And OTC is a huge market, actually. It's $15 trillion of crypto assets were settled OTC in 2025. We've been also working very closely with wallets and custody providers. For example, Braun, an MPC self-custodial wallet, which is a spin out from Copper Custody. So extremely high level of security, amazing product. I'd highly encourage you to actually use it. Have integrated confidential tokens natively into the Braun wallet. So you can use it to shield, send, and do whatever you want with confidential tokens. And this has particularly been used for B2B payments. So you're a company, you want to pay your team on chain. Well, it's better if you can actually do that confidentially, which is exactly what we are enabling today. So Braun is an important partner for us also because the Braun users are holding a lot of assets. So the average amount of assets held by Braun users is over $1 million per user. We also have TGBP. So you might have seen some news recently. TGBP is a GBP stablecoin that's onshore in the UK, so that's really important. And they've actually been partnering with Coinbase, with Kraken, to enable TGBP, GBP trading on the exchanges. TGBP also has a confidential TGBP token that is already available today. So you can actually pay people with British pounds on-chain confidentially. And we are working closely together to enable confidential on and off ramp between fiat GBP and on-chain tokenized GBP. So today, about 17% of the TGBP market cap is already shielded, and we're expecting that number to grow exponentially in the coming months. So the bottom line is that pretty much any financial use case you want to build, you can actually now build with Zama, because our protocol doesn't force you into one very specific chain or one very specific way of doing things. We've got people building everything from hedge funds on chain to portfolio management to banking with stablecoins. All of that is actually being built and is coming to Zama this year. Well, finally, I wanted to talk about something that we have not yet made public, but you're going to hear a lot more about that in the coming months. we are working on a way to enable confidential DeFi and swaps directly on Ethereum. So you'll be able to plug into existing DeFi protocols. You'll be able to swap tokens confidentially in a decentralized manner on Ethereum mainnet and then other chains in the future, all with a very nice front-end application that we're also working on. So when that happens, if you think about it, if you can have access to all of DeFi, but keeping your balances and trades confidential, what would still hold you back of shielding all of your tokens? I think the day people can earn yield on their confidential assets and can swap their assets confidentially, there's really no reason to keep your money unencrypted. And we believe that the adoption of FHE and Zama and encryption in general in financial transactions will be the same that we've seen in the internet or messaging apps before, where in a few years, we went from no encryption at all to over 95% of the data transiting on the internet being encrypted. I'm very confident in 4 years, 95% of financial transactions on chain will also be encrypted because frankly, why not? Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Rand. And thanks for kicking off our very first episode of Shielded. As you mentioned, things have only accelerated since the launch, and we've got a number of amazing partnerships and products to share. I'm going to let you hang out backstage for a little while, and I'm going to continue the conversation with our partners. We'll bring you back out for Q&A in a bit. But on to our partners. First up, we have OpenZeppelin. Jonathan Alexander is the CTO of OpenZeppelin. If you've ever deployed a smart contract with a standard library, it's likely you've used OpenZeppelin's code. Jonathan and his team partnered with Zama to co-develop ERC 7984, which is the new token standard that does what ERC 20 did to raw token deployments. It makes confidential tokens interoperable, composable, and production ready. Jonathan, welcome to Shielded.
Thank you, Kyle. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here as well. So ERC 20 has been the foundational token standard on Ethereum for years, and it works. So I was curious to pick your brain here. What's the case for a new token standard? What does ERC 7984 actually do that ERC 20 can't? And why does that matter today?
Great. Well, just again to say a little bit and set the stage as to our involvement and partnership and why we have worked together with Zama on this new standard. As you said, OpenZeppelin is a leading contributor, has been for many years, to the standards in the permissionless blockchain space. Dozens of standards we've helped guide and co-author, and we've produced this library that is a trusted implementation of standards and best practices. That is the backbone of DeFi, the backbone now of TradFi, with almost all the 9 of 10 leading stable coins, and I believe 10 of 10 of kind of the most valuable RWAs are all implemented with OpenZeppelin. And we're an advisor and a partner and a development partner and a security reviewer for many leading institutions. So what we, have all learned in the past, let's say 5 years, I've been CTO at OpenZeppelin for 7 years, is that there are use cases where privacy, on-chain privacy, is a requirement, but the benefits of operating on a public chain are potentially many. And so ERC 20 is the standard that DeFi has been built on. Having a standard for fungible tokens, a common interface that everybody can rely on, has unlocked this tremendous activity that led to this hyper growth of DeFi and adoption, because wallets, scanners, things that report, protocols, DeFi protocols can all rely on one interface, all build to one interface, and then innovators and issuers can now use that interface. And so the value of standard is really critical when it comes to tokenization Because if we just had 1,000 different things, we wouldn't have seen this fast unlock. But ERC20 was built without privacy in mind. And so everything is public. And that has been a blocker for, as Rand already talked about, there are regulated there are regulated entities that might be interested in or are interested in issuing and utilizing kind of the trading capabilities and the other innovative financial capabilities that could be available on a programmable blockchain. But by regulation, they are not allowed to just do things in public, first of all. Second of all, anybody who participates in very large value issuance, large value trading, whether or not they're regulated, suffer. They do not want to be public with the value that they trade and the value that they hold in their wallets. And so people have participated in this. Obviously, there's been huge financial gains for individuals, but there's a vast majority of people who are reluctant or can't or would not without privacy. So we've known this. And now we have technologies such as Zama has implemented with its very innovative approach to the coprocessor that can work with these public blockchains, elegant capabilities for integration. But, I also congratulate Zama as early on realizing that rather than just doing a one-off implementation, pushing for a standard is a vast unlock to making this available to everybody. And so we collaborated closely with Zama. We partnered on this. We are a big believer in this is an important area where a standard is absolutely needed. And now we have created a standard that is fully compatible, and the first working implementations now that we have in the OpenZeppelin library work directly with FHE, with Zama specifically, but also this standard will support other approaches to encryption, including ZK solutions, and that was part of the design goal. There are some key problems that had to be solved in the design, but now they're solved, they're in the public domain, and now this is already, creating this unlock opportunity because now we're starting to see, wallets, scanners, and now we can have the other builders adopt this. So this was the need, and it's there and working today.
That's great. So, you've worked on a number of standards, as you mentioned, and OpenZeppelin's reputation is really built on security. I'm curious how your security expertise kind of came into play when designing the 7984 standard.
Well, I think that there's many layers to the security and the differences and the concerns here. The first thing I'd like to point out is that lack of privacy is actually a huge security concern.
Okay.
The biggest hack, I still think it's the biggest hack that ever occurred, the Bybit hack. The Bybit, I don't know, I guess hack is the right term for what happened there, came because it was a targeted attack at a specific wallet because the attackers knew how much value that wallet held and operated.
Right.
And this is, again, why, large traders do not want, they would prefer privacy. So first of all, 7984 and this privacy standard is actually a security improvement in a key exposure area. So that's the first thing I'll say. But second thing is that as far as the actual what happens here is that the security concerns, first of all, obviously begin with the what have we implemented in smart contracts and specifically this new interface. And there, again, OpenZeppelin has a very thorough process of design. The Ethereum community has a process of public design review, which is what we call the ERC process. We do careful code audits, which have been done now, and everything that's issued has been carefully audited. We have public bug bounties, and those are the basics of making sure that what we provide here is secure at the smart contract level. But of course, we also are introducing a new layer in privacy, which is what is the encryption layer, what is handling the encryption, what is the technology being used, and how is that interacted with. And in that regard, OpenZeppelin specifically, for anything that goes into our libraries or our tooling, we vet everything, but an extensive part of our partnership with Zama is to make sure every part of that is secure. We've been an auditor on multiple things in the stack, and we are actually an operator of one of the operators of the Genesis KMS, which is a threshold, key system that is utilized here, but OpenZeppelin and other, very highly known, highly reliable providers are running these, are operators in that part of the network, and that's a key element of the overall security of the system. So, so in the case of what I will say is with 7984, as people utilize different encryption things, that becomes a key part of what has to be looked at. There are different kind of exposures here and risks, and some that went before go away. And we look at every part of that stack.
Yeah, incredibly thorough. So OpenZeppelin also works with, I would imagine, thousands of developers. People have exposure to your libraries. You're kind of on a day-to-day basis getting feedback loops from the developer community, the Ethereum community. I'm curious if you have some early feedback from the developer community who are building on top of these DeFi protocols or RWA platforms, if you've gotten some early feedback or reception on confidential tokens and the new standard. What gets them excited? Are there any obstacles that kind of need massaging you need to kind of overcome some of these obstacles for adoption? What are those conversations like?
Well, there is, honestly, among the new standards we've worked on, as I said, in my 7 years at OpenZeppelin and the past few years, I think the excitement for ERC 7984 and this specific standard is among the highest I've seen. What I will say, and we are embedding support for it in a variety of OpenZeppelin libraries in our new tools. And by the way, a lot of coding is turning to developers using the LLMs and the LLM tools, and OpenZeppelin is issuing skills and CLI that also now will fully incorporate 7984 support and also specifically the different implementation supports like our Zama support. Interest is really high. What I will say is that the marriage, what the initial unlock is just with privacy. The real unlock will be the marriage of the privacy with the regulated token support, which will transition to the discussion and our collaboration with Joachim's team and ERC 3643. What people are really looking for is that marriage together of those two things. And when that happens, as we have trusted standards, then we are going to have, I believe, there's a tremendous amount of interest, both on financial institution side and the DeFi side to support this. And I think once we have these two kind of trusted standards, everyone will begin to rally around them. That is going to lead to this big unlock, push forward of activity. And the other thing I also anticipate, because this is what we're hearing, is new innovation. So part of the thing is that I think for a while we had a tremendous amount of innovation in DeFi. There's still a lot of innovation there, but now everybody's talking about RWAs coming, and they are coming, and that's going to be huge. The TradFi people are going to bring new ideas, but I also think we're going to see a new wave of innovation of how TradFi and DeFi can merge. And so I think, but we need these two things. Yeah. So that's what we see as the big thing. Super amount of interest, big excitement. Yeah, very excited about this. So.
Well, if we do our job right, hopefully ERC 7984 will be one of those standards that will seem obvious in retrospect. I think there's a lot of work to be done still, but we're really excited to be a part of this journey with you. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for joining us today on Shielded. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Next up, we've got the T-Rex network. They're the leading infrastructure for real-world asset tokenization built on ERC 3643, the open standard for compliant permission tokens on public blockchains. They're backed by Apex Group, which administers $3.2 trillion in assets. And T-Rex enables regulated institutions to issue, manage, and transfer digital assets with compliance built directly into the token logic. As Jonathan mentioned, together, we're integrating the Zama protocol directly into the T-Rex ledger, giving institutions the ability to operate on top of public blockchains without exposing positions, balances, or counterparty relationships to the market. Today, I'm joined by Joachim, who's leading the charge at T-Rex and Apex. Joachim, welcome to Shielded.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining. So there's been a lot of talk about real-world asset tokenization for years now. This year, it feels like there's some real momentum in the conference scene, discussions on one-on-one conversations with partners. I'm curious where you think we are on the adoption curve and why the change is happening now.
Yeah, so you're right. There's a lot of things moving. Regulation is evolving. The technology is there. Everything is aligning to make it the moment when it's actually starting. For many years, you have had a lot of proof of concepts that happened here and there. It has been ongoing for years. I've been in this space for the last 8 years. I have created the ERC 3643 together with the Tokeny team. And we've seen this space even before the RWA term was even something. Mm-hmm. But now we see that it's really accelerating more and more, and that it's becoming something tangible and real. The big unlock is first, regulation that is becoming more and more clear. But to be honest, we already anticipated that for a long time with 3643 by saying that the rules that apply to these tokenized securities are the same as the rules of the securities themselves. So that's why we engineered the standard this way. Also, the fact of having new technologies such as Zama for confidentiality, that's a super big unlock, as Jonathan was saying before, and Rand even before him. Confidentiality is not a choice. Like it's something that is mandatory in a lot of cases. And even when it's not mandatory, it's something that is really required by most of these institutions to make things really happen on chain and to bring capital on chain.
Because that's something I want to talk about, because before Zama, T-Rex infrastructure had compliance built in. That was sort of your bread and butter, on-chain identity, permission transfers, things like this. What it didn't have, as I understand it, was privacy. So I'd love for you to elaborate on the conversations you're having with these institutional players on why privacy confidentiality was one of the missing pieces to bring them on chain.
Yeah, so actually we have been discussing for a very long time with a lot of institutions. We have tokenized assets from all these institutions, sometimes on private chains, sometimes on public chain. Public chains were mostly small amount of assets because it's really at the proof of concept level and trying the technology. But yeah, for a long time, it has been about building these things each institution was creating their own private network. Sometimes they were creating small consortium where they had like 2 or 3 institutions sharing a ledger, but it was very limited. You can see it a bit like what happened in the 90s, where you had all the companies building their own intranet, and public blockchain is the internet in this case. And before privacy enable technologies, there was like this choice between either you make it private and it's on your private intranet, or you make it public on the internet, but then everyone has access to everything. Now with the integration of FHE, we can combine the best of both worlds, because we keep everything that makes it great to be on a public network, the access to liquidity, the access to DeFi, to all the other protocols. And we have also confidentiality and programmability, which is super important as well. When you want to enforce compliance automatically at the smart contract level and make transaction validate the compliance automatically, it has to be able to compute on this data. And that's something that you can do only with FHE, to be honest.
Yeah. I want to switch gears here briefly from kind of the T-Rex side to the Apex group side. So Apex operates in one of the most regulated parts of finance. I'm curious how regulators are responding to the conversation around bringing privacy to public blockchains. Is this something that regulators understand? How are those conversations evolving?
Yeah, so that's actually something that the regulators were even asking for a long time. That was something that was slowing down the adoption, or at least the approval from some regulators in some use cases. And the fact of having this opportunity to bring confidentiality at the token level is a great unlock, because otherwise, in a lot of different jurisdictions, the regulators were pushing for private chains, just for the simple fact that you didn't have the possibility to have confidentiality. Now, the main idea that we have with T-Rex is to really replace, not replace what exists today with the tokens that you can see on many different chains, which are most of the time either digital twins or wrappers of these assets, but we want to really represent the asset themselves on chain and make the chain the primary registry for these assets. You can see it as a software upgrade for Apex Group, where we are going to replace the database and the spreadsheets that we have internally for all these assets by the blockchain. So the blockchain becomes the database.
Yeah. So we had a spoiler earlier in the episode here, but Apex has committed $100 billion in tokenized assets to the T-Rex ledger by June of next year, which is an incredibly ambitious number. In your view, what has to go right to hit that target?
There are many things. So on our side, on T-Rex, really, the point is that we are issuing from Bermuda. This whole infrastructure is hosted in Bermuda. Actually, Apex is also incorporated in Bermuda, so it was a good parallel there. But we do it in a regulated environment. Bermuda is very regulated, so we have first to get the license to issue the chain and the token, and then once we have that, the big unlock is there already to launch the mainnet. We expect mainnet around Q3, Q4 of this year. And yes, the 100 billion that is committed is by June 2027. So you can understand that if we release the mainnet at the end of the year, we don't have a lot of time to do it. At the same time, we are on both sides, like a lot of members in the team are both on the Apex side and on the T-Rex side. So we can make it happen. It's just about making things align properly. And if we ever don't hit the number by June, it will be very close, I guess. It's just about getting things aligned and getting the approval from issuers, because in the end, Apex is servicing these assets, but the issuers have to also be involved in this process and to go with it. But we have a lot of different issuers, asset managers, and I think that the interest is becoming bigger and bigger. Whenever you speak with one of these asset managers, they are all speaking about tokenization right now. So I think convincing them to tokenize will not be the issue. It will be quite easy to convince them. Then we need to execute, and that's the big work, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the fact alone that a firm servicing $3.5 trillion in assets is signaling this monumental shift, I think, is incredibly promising. We're super excited to be partnering with you on this, and really appreciate you joining today. I think next step for you and me is to get to shielding about $100 billion. What do you think about that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Thanks again for joining, Joachim.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, today's final guest is from GSR. Spencer Hallern is the global head of OTC trading there, one of the most established crypto capital markets firms in the world. GSR has been a liquidity backbone for this space for over a decade. I'm sure that everyone on the call today is well aware of them. And this quarter, Spencer and his team made history, executing the first confidential OTC trade on Ethereum using the Zama protocol. Spencer, welcome to Shielded. Oh, you're on mute, Spencer.
Try that again. Thanks for having me, Kyle. And thank you to the Zama team for finally designing a technology that we've been yearning for quite some time as a large scale trading provider.
Incredible. Well, we're happy to hear that. So most of us are familiar with the concept of an OTC trade, but I think you have a very specific vantage point, which is that you're in the flow day in and day out. You've built a career around this. Maybe you can outline the anatomy of an OTC trade, start to finish. How does it work on chain? What is the experience like?
Sure. So, I mean, GSR deals with a myriad of participants in the crypto markets. This could be miners, this could be projects themselves, individuals, funds, etc. And, folks will contact us and they have an intent. Where things get really tricky is if the intent happens to be to sell or trade a derivative structure on tokens they already hold. So generally, the flow is, unlike in traditional finance, they have to move tokens physically to GSR, which then GSR can conduct a sale. The problem is, crypto is an open ledger until recently, right? And in trading, information's power. So having token transfers out there being observed publicly by various on-chain analytics and frankly then talked about on X, Twitter, etc., is sort of akin to folks sitting around a poker table trying to play poker, but their cards are face up. And I think it doesn't take much to imagine how that can sort of lead to subpar outcomes for both, importantly for clients, but then also the trading firms themselves. So, in the prior era, there will sometimes what will happen is desks will try to be creative. Maybe if you've got a long-standing relationship with a client, you might take steps to go and try to hedge a trade before the token transfer to try to kind of stay ahead of the game. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes it's a spot transaction that needs to occur. There isn't a mechanism to look at trying to offload that risk without actually physically moving the tokens. And so, the second a token transfer happens, the client is disadvantaged. And it plays out in multiple ways. If a client is, say they're looking to slowly sell into the market, well, the flags go off. People know that a transaction has occurred. And there's a lot of smart folks in this space, as we all know. And there's a cottage industry of folks that make their living off of observing token transfers and attempting to front run them. Now, that's a term Rand sort of touched on before. Like in traditional finance, if Goldman Sachs receives an order and goes and tries to front run their client, that's illegal. But in crypto, it's an open ledger. So it's actually just really crafty that somebody can sort of observe what somebody else does and infer what they might do next. So
Yeah.
Anyway,
No,
it's
it's
changed.
interesting. Yeah. It feels a little bit upside down. I mean, what is the status quo from your clients? Do people just kind of accept this as the cost of doing business in crypto, or are there clever workarounds they try to construct with you? Like, what is the typical engagement with the customer now?
Well, there's a lot of sensitivity to this. So I think that there's a few things. I think sometimes maybe the thought, again, I think the game has changed, and this is why I'm on the call, and this is why I'm excited to talk about this. But sometimes it's move the tokens at some random time of day and don't do anything, and then hopefully the market forgets, and then like a week or two later, like maybe we'll look to transact.
Okay.
Or sometimes it's, if there's sort of an established relationship, it's, can you go and try to trade something in the market using perpetuals or something like that, and then we'll move the tokens later. But there's not always solutions. So it's very exciting, and we were very pumped to participate in the first confidential on-chain transaction. And what's key for us is we still need to, as a financial institution that's been in the space for a long time, we still need to do KYC, and we still need to know whom we're trading with. And this provides for that. It's just that the outside world isn't aware of what's going on. And that's big. So yes, there is a transaction that's occurred that they can see, but the magnitude is unknown. And I think that solves a lot of the problem.
Yeah. Well, if we zoom out a little bit here, and let's imagine that the kind of confidential OTC transfer has become the norm, and confidentiality is pervasive in crypto. How does that change the playing field for institutional liquidity, for crypto markets more broadly? Do you think that basically it will be a recreation of kind of existing TradFi privacy paradigm, or do you think there's a new design space here? Like, where are we trending towards in the long run?
Well, so I think it's twofold. One, I mean, folks don't like their financial transactions being publicly broadcast. So I think just generally changing the game there, I think, is going to lead to a step up in adoption. But secondly, I think to the extent that if there is no longer the risk of every transaction being front run or traded against by predatory traders, I think you're going to see a massive improvement in pricing and liquidity, because there's sort of this like toxic participant in the market that, generally speaking, can always sort of act as a transaction tax of sorts. And with the removal of that, I think you'll see a significant bolstering of liquidity. I think that pricing from OTC desks will become a lot more competitive. So all of that, I think just leads to deeper liquidity, deeper adoption. I think it just really increases the chance of sort of full scale embrace of the space.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it sounds like, I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, confidentiality ends up becoming a net benefit for all market participants, and especially users and customers of the crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, trying to think about the losers, and it really just might be these very sharp, and hats off to them, trading firms like that are sort of predatory prop trading in nature, that are sitting out there and trying to read on-chain activity and front run. And hats off to them, and I think they've done very well with that but the game may be over. So
the arbitrage might be on its way out. Okay, well, Spencer, I mean, this has been a landmark moment for us. We're super excited about the potential of scaling this up with you guys and making this kind of the default for OTC desks. So thanks for helping us get there. Thanks for being kind of a pioneering partner on this, and thanks for joining us on Shielded today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Now it is time to open up for questions. We're going to bring Rand back on stage. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We're going to surface them right here on the screen, and we'll answer them as they come in. While we're waiting for a few questions, Rand, I wanted to turn it over to you briefly. Anything you want to add from the earlier conversations? I know you were behind the scenes, but I know you were listening intently. Anything that came up that you want to comment on or inspired some reflections?
Well, I think, it's interesting because pretty much everyone regardless of their background, whether they come from finance or technology, is converging towards, blockchain is going to be the future of finance. And, we've been talking about this for a long time, right? I think, arguably blockchain started as a financial alternative to, central banks. But I think what's happening now is that people finally decided, yeah, it is going to be the rails that we're going to be using for payments, for trading, for asset issuance, for pretty much anything that you can assign value and ownership to. And this is not something to take lightly. I don't think people understand how much bigger blockchain is about to get now that people who are actually managing, running the money is using it. Like DeFi is a speck in comparison to finance more globally. And I think we'll talk about trillions in the coming years, like we're talking about billions in DeFi today.
Yeah. We've got one question coming through. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. How do you solve the cold start problem of ecosystem development? So, we talked a little bit today about developing integrations with a number of partners, all the touch points in the token lifecycle. We've talked about building the confidential token standard. How do you think about scaling up the volume of shielded tokens and simultaneously working with the infrastructure and the providers and the financial services rails that are going to help move those confidential tokens?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? Right. Well, I think, there's really nothing different in blockchain than in any startup that you're building, any product you're building. You need to find a niche. You need to find distribution within that niche. You need to find partners within that niche. And then you have to basically own that niche and then expand from there. And so for us, I think, we found the first use cases that we really want to focus on. So, TRX as a partner for RWAs is one of them. We think that this is going to be a massive use case for the Zama protocol and for blockchain in general. Very, very bullish on that. Within payments, we've kind of narrowed it down to B2B payments. I think, payroll needs privacy. Corporate cross-border settlement between your subsidiaries needs privacy. Paying suppliers need privacy. And these might not be like the use cases you think about on Twitter, because not a lot of people are making those payments. But each of those payments carry very high value and very sensitive information, which is where really privacy comes in. And then finally, as I mentioned, we do want to take a stab at DeFi, because even though DeFi is not a huge market in comparison to other financial things, it is still an existing market where people are looking for privacy. And if we can solve confidential swaps, pretty much everything from there in DeFi can be solved. If you can do confidential swaps, you can do confidential borrow lend. If you can do confidential borrow lend, you can do confidential leverage trading for DEXs and for things like that. Like confidential swaps is really, really a core primitive that we need to crack, that we're actively working on.
Yeah. I've got another question. This one's actually from the personal side that I've been thinking about. Do you expect there to be a tipping point for confidential tokens, meaning we reach some sort of threshold of total value shielded that's going to get the ecosystem excited enough that it's going to kind of be like this self-reflexive growth curve? Or
I mean, so there are two parts to that answer. The first one is privacy is a minuscule market in crypto right now. So the biggest privacy protocol by TVS, at least Zcash, has about, I think, a couple of $1 billion shielded. So the TVS of Zcash after a decade is basically $2 billion. Think about TRX again for a second, right? TRX is bringing $100 billion of assets on chain. If 2% of that gets shielded, it's already more than Zcash. 2%. So I think, being the biggest privacy protocol is a very low bar at the moment, because there's just not that much money encrypted. And the reason for this is because encrypting money on chain had no utility previously. And that is a fundamental difference between the way Zama is addressing privacy and existing privacy protocol. We're not just enabling you to pay people privately, we're enabling you to have composable privacy so that you can have, confidential swaps, the utility is now there. And that is really important. The second part to that question is, I think people underestimate how much of a moat TVS actually is. If you're encrypting money with Zama and you want to move it to a different privacy protocol, you have to unshield it and reshield it because the fundamental technologies are different, right? FHE is not MPC, MPC is not TE, TE is not ZK, right? So they're just different technologies. The cost of unshielding is going to be bigger and bigger as there is more and more money that moves on chain. And so I do think that if we manage to bring a lot of TVS in the Zama protocol very quickly, it will create a moat that no amount of AI development can replicate.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes here. I want to end with you on maybe a forecast for next quarter, a teaser on kind of what's top of mind for you. What are you most excited about in the coming quarter, and then we can check at the next shielded if we've managed to hit that milestone.
Well, I mean, I think for me it's very obvious. This quarter for us is mainly about enabling confidential DeFi and confidential swaps. We want to show that Zama can enable things that people need beyond just transferring and holding money privately. And I think that will open up the door to so many other things, so that is going to be like a big focus for us in Q2, beyond, the usual focus of working with partners, supporting more chains, having more integrations, but purely in terms of functionality and utility, I think confidential DeFi is really the thing to look for in the coming months.
Okay, you heard it here first. That's all the time we have today. Thanks again for joining for the very first Shielded Live. As a reminder, we're publishing this full report next Thursday, April 30th. We'll share the details on the landing page after this call. We really appreciate your support and amplifying it and getting the word out there. We really want to make this confidential token ecosystem thrive. And you guys are a big part of that. Thanks to all of our guests today. And we will see you next quarter for the next installment of Shielded.